There is a strange and unsettling paradox that echoes through every age of history. The future so often belongs not to the wisest, not to the most thoughtful, but to the bold, the reckless, sometimes even the fools. Look closely at the rise and fall of leaders, corporations, and entire civilizations, and you will see it again and again. The careful and cautious thinker is left behind, while the loud, the daring, and the shameless seize the stage. The philosopher retreats into silence, while the opportunist shouts his way into power. The one who knows how fragile life is, how delicate truth can be, hesitates, and in that pause, the fool rushes forward and takes the crown. This is not just political. It happens in workplaces, in communities, even in our personal lives. We've all watched people who seem careless, arrogant, or dangerously ignorant somehow rise to prominence, while the sincere, the kind, the thoughtful remain unheard. And it leaves us with a haunting question: why does the world so often reward foolishness? Few thinkers were willing to face this question with as much cold clarity as Niccolò Machiavelli. Writing in the early 16th century, he dared to strip away illusions about power, showing us that politics is not a stage for morality, but a battlefield where boldness, manipulation, and appearance often matter more than truth or virtue. His work, The Prince, has been both reviled and admired for centuries, but at its core lies a chilling insight: in the contest of power, fools and opportunists often triumph over the wise. And yet, this is not the whole story. If Machiavelli gives us the brutal diagnosis, others, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Jung, and even Socrates, help us understand why this happens, and whether there is a way to live meaningfully in a world that seems to hand the future to fools. In this exploration, we will journey through 6 profound insights from ancient philosophy to modern psychology that reveal why foolishness so often wins, and how you, as a thoughtful individual, might respond, not with despair, but with clarity, resilience, and a deeper sense of freedom. There is a scene that repeats itself endlessly across history. The careful thinker, burdened by doubt, stands still, while the reckless fool surges ahead and claims victory. It feels unjust, almost absurd, and yet Niccolò Machiavelli understood why it happens. Machiavelli, writing in the turbulence of Renaissance Italy, observed rulers who survived not because they were just, but because they were bold. In The Prince, he describes how a leader must often act against honesty, against compassion, even against wisdom itself, if survival is at stake. A prince, he argued, must learn how not to be good. This was not cynicism for its own sake. Machiavelli was not celebrating foolishness. He was exposing a law of human affairs. In times of crisis, hesitation can be fatal. Those who act boldly, even rashly, often sweep aside the hesitant. In this sense, the fool, the one too reckless to second-guess himself, gains the advantage. Consider a modern workplace. The cautious employee weighs every possibility, trying to find the perfect solution. Meanwhile, a less competent but more confident colleague volunteers an idea quickly, speaks with conviction, and ends up being trusted with the project. The wise one waits to be ready. The bold one steps forward, and the world rewards the step, not the readiness. Machiavelli crystallizes this paradox in one of his most unsettling claims: fortune favors the bold. He compares fortune to a wild river that floods unpredictably. The wise may study it, analyze its patterns, and prepare cautiously. But the bold one builds dikes, charges forward, and takes risks, and sometimes that reckless action secures control. The deeper tension here is that wisdom tends to slow us down. The wise see complexities, consequences, hidden dangers. The fool sees none of these, and so charges straight into opportunity. In the short term, blindness masquerades as courage. But this insight leaves us with a haunting question. If the future belongs to the bold, even when they are foolish, what then is the role of wisdom? Should we envy the fool's victories? Or is there another kind of strength hidden in restraint? Picture this: two speakers stand before a crowd. One is thoughtful, careful, weighing every word, aware of nuance. The other is loud, confident, even reckless, but his words carry the rhythm of certainty. Who will the crowd remember? Who will they follow? More often than not, it is the second. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. He warned us that most people do not hunger for truth itself. Truth is often uncomfortable, destabilizing, and slow to digest. Instead, people hunger for conviction, for the feeling of certainty. The one who appears strong, who speaks as though he knows, holds more sway than the one who actually knows. Modern psychology has confirmed this again and again. We are wired to trust confidence more than competence. In studies, people consistently mistake assertiveness for intelligence, mistaking the look of knowing for the reality of knowing. This explains why fools, who lack the hesitation of the wise, so often dominate. Their ignorance shields them from self-doubt, and in a strange twist, that very ignorance becomes a source of persuasive power. Nietzsche called this the triumph of appearance over essence. In Beyond Good and Evil, he reminds us that humans are artists of surfaces. We create masks, roles, and performances, and society rewards those who can wear their mask with the greatest conviction. The wise man, aware of the limits of knowledge, struggles to project certainty. The fool, unaware of his ignorance, does so effortlessly. This is why demagogues rise in politics, why shallow influencers attract millions, and why the loudest voice in the room often drowns out the truest one. It is not because people are evil, it is because we are drawn almost magnetically to confidence, even when it is empty. And so we are left with a sobering recognition. The world does not necessarily belong to those who are right, but to those who look right. Appearance seduces, and essence often struggles to compete. But here another question emerges. If appearances rule the crowd, is truth doomed to remain powerless? Or is there a way to live truthfully in a world that seems to worship only surfaces? And if these questions resonate, consider subscribing. Each week we explore the timeless struggles between power, meaning, and the human soul. Imagine Socrates walking through the streets of Athens. He does not shout, he does not promise. Instead, he asks questions. He unsettles people, pokes holes in their certainties, and exposes their ignorance. For this, he is not celebrated, but condemned. The city, preferring comforting lies, sentences him to death. This moment is not just about one philosopher. It is about the fragility of truth itself. Truth, Socrates knew, is slow, it is difficult, it demands patience, humility, and often pain. Lies, on the other hand, spread quickly, carried on the wings of desire and fear. A foolish certainty can reach a crowd in minutes. A thoughtful truth may take generations to be understood. Centuries later, Michel Foucault would describe truth not as a universal constant, but as something produced and maintained within structures of power. What counts as truth, he argued, is shaped by those who control discourse, institutions, and knowledge. In other words, truth is not merely fragile, it is vulnerable to being bent, reshaped, even silenced by those with louder voices. This helps explain why the fool often triumphs. He does not need to prove his words, he only needs to repeat them until they dominate the air. The wise man, bound to accuracy and subtlety, struggles to compete in this uneven battle. In the marketplace of ideas, truth is like a delicate flame, easily extinguished by the storm of noise and spectacle. We see this today more vividly than ever. A false claim spreads across the internet in seconds, shared, believed, and repeated. The careful correction, the nuanced explanation, arrives too late, too slow, too fragile to undo the damage. Socrates was silenced in the court of Athens. Now truth is silenced in the court of public opinion, overwhelmed by speed and volume. And yet, there is something quietly heroic in tending to that fragile flame. Socrates drank the hemlock rather than abandon it. Countless others across history have chosen silence, exile, or even death, refusing to betray it. They remind us that truth may be fragile, but it is also enduring, like a seed that waits patiently for the right soil. Here we must ask, if truth is fragile and foolishness is fast, how can one remain faithful to truth without being crushed by the world's noise? So we return to the haunting question with which we began. Why does the future so often seem to belong to fools? Through Machiavelli, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Socrates, Jung, and Camus, we have seen the contours of this paradox. The bold beat the wise. Appearances seduce more than truths persuade. The herd clings to simple voices. Truth itself is fragile, always vulnerable to distortion. The wise carry shadows that weigh them down, and yet, despite all this, there remains a power that foolishness cannot touch. Let us briefly gather the 6 insights once more. The bold beat the wise. Machiavelli reveals that audacity wins where hesitation falters. The seduction of appearances. Nietzsche and psychology show us that confidence often matters more than competence. The comfort of herd thinking. Kierkegaard and Freud uncover why crowds surrender to simplicity. The fragility of truth. Socrates and Foucault remind us that truth is delicate and often silenced. The shadow of the wise. Jung reveals how deep vision can paralyze while ignorance rushes forward, turning the paradox into power. Camus and the Stoics teach us that true strength lies not in conquering fools, but in mastering oneself. Taken together, these insights paint a sobering picture. The fool will always have his victories, for the structure of human affairs tilts in his favor. But that is not the end of the story. The wise need not envy him, for his triumphs are often shallow, fleeting, hollow. What endures is not the applause of the crowd, but the depth of one's soul. Socrates lost his trial, but his life still speaks across millennia. Nietzsche, dismissed as a madman, continues to awaken minds. Jung, Freud, Kierkegaard, Camus, all bore burdens heavier than the fool could imagine, and yet their insights remain alive. The fool may win the crown of the present, but the wise inherit the future of meaning. And so, the challenge I leave you with is this: do not measure your worth by the speed or noise of others. Do not despair when the world crowns the reckless and ignores the thoughtful. Instead, become the kind of person who can withstand the age of fools without becoming one. Cultivate depth in a world addicted to surfaces. Guard the fragile flame of truth, even when the wind howls against it. Carry your shadow and let it make you whole. The future may seem to belong to fools, but your life, your inner kingdom, belongs to you, and no fool can take that away. If this journey has resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe. Each week we walk together through questions that have haunted humanity for centuries. Share your reflections below, not as part of the herd, but as an individual voice in a community of thoughtful souls. Remember, the world may reward fools, but history, eternity, and perhaps even your own conscience reward those who dare to live wisely. By now, the paradox stands before us, fully revealed. The bold fool rushes ahead. Appearances seduce the crowd. Herd thinking drowns out individuals. Truth proves fragile, and the wise are slowed by their own depth. It can feel almost hopeless, as if the future will always belong to fools. But here, another voice enters, Albert Camus. In the myth of Sisyphus, he tells us that life is absurd. The world does not bend to our longing for fairness or clarity. And yet, Camus insists, we are free. The task is not to despair in the face of absurdity, but to embrace it, to push our stone up the hill, knowing it will roll back, and to smile nonetheless. Applied to our question, this means accepting that the world may crown fools. It may reward noise over truth, speed over depth, ignorance over wisdom. But this does not imprison us. For the thoughtful individual, freedom lies in refusing to let the world's standards dictate the meaning of life. Success is not measured by the crowd, but by the integrity of one's own existence. The Stoics, too, remind us of this freedom. Epictetus, once a slave, taught that while the world may rob you of wealth, status, or recognition, it cannot touch your inner life unless you allow it. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor surrounded by power struggles, wrote that the true victory is to master oneself. In a world that rewards fools, the Stoic refuses to be ruled by bitterness. He chooses clarity over envy, strength over despair. This is the final insight. The paradox cannot be erased, but it can be transformed. The fool may win the crown, but the thoughtful can win something greater. Inner freedom, endurance, the quiet power of living authentically. To outshout the fool is pointless. To outlast him, to remain true when the noise fades, that is the deeper triumph. And so the challenge is not to eliminate foolishness from the world, but to cultivate wisdom within yourself so deeply that you are no longer shaken by the fool's victories. You may not inherit the stage, but you inherit your soul. There is a strange burden that often falls upon the thoughtful. The more deeply you see into life, the heavier life becomes. Carl Jung understood this well. He saw that those who peer too far into the depths of reality carry a kind of shadow on their shoulders, a weight that the fool, blissfully blind, never knows. Think of the wise friend who hesitates before speaking, who considers the ripple effects of every choice, who carries the pain of history and the uncertainty of the future in their mind. Contrast them with the carefree soul who leaps without thinking, laughing as they go. The first is slowed by vision, the second propelled by ignorance. Jung described the psyche as a vast landscape, full of both light and darkness. To become wise is in some sense to confront this darkness, the suffering, the contradictions, the cruelty of human nature. To see too much can paralyze. The fool, by refusing this confrontation, rushes forward unburdened. And so, in the race for worldly success, the fool often outruns the wise. History bears this out. Many visionaries, prophets, and philosophers lived in poverty or exile. They were too attuned to the shadows of existence, too honest about human frailty to play the game of appearances. Meanwhile, the reckless and shallow prospered. Jung would say this is because the wise must wrestle with their unconscious, with the parts of themselves and humanity they would rather not see. That wrestling slows them down, but it also deepens them. There is a haunting irony here. The very depth that grants wisdom can also isolate and delay us. The fool's blindness appears from the outside like freedom, but Jung reminds us that ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. It festers. The fool may win the crown, but he carries unseen cracks within him. The wise may lose in the short term, but they carry something infinitely more enduring: integration of the self. So here lies the existential question. Is it better to live quickly, unburdened by depth, and risk collapse, or to carry the shadow, knowing it may cost you worldly success, but give you a richer inner life? Imagine a crowded square in the heart of a city. A man climbs onto a box and begins to shout simple slogans, offering easy answers to life's hardest questions. The crowd gathers, nodding, cheering, swept up by the rhythm of his voice. Yet in that same square, a quiet thinker sits at the edge, whispering uncomfortable truths to anyone who dares listen. Few approach. Most avoid him. Why? Because foolishness has an ally, the herd drive. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, warned that the crowd is untruth. He saw how individuals, when swallowed by the mass, abandon their responsibility to think for themselves. The herd does not want subtlety, paradox, or depth. It wants clarity, certainty, and the comfort of belonging. And so it turns toward the fool, who promises easy answers, not the wise one who speaks of complexity. Freud, too, dissected this phenomenon in group psychology and the analysis of the ego. He observed that when people merge into crowds, their critical faculties weaken. They regress to a childlike state, looking for a parental figure to soothe them. The leader who shouts with confidence, no matter how foolish, becomes that comforting parent. The crowd, desperate to avoid anxiety, embraces him. This explains why entire nations have followed reckless leaders into catastrophe, why fads and illusions spread faster than truth, and why the wise so often feel exiled in their own time. To stand apart, to think for oneself, is lonely and heavy. To melt into the herd is warm, easy, and safe. But Kierkegaard insists on a hard truth. The individual who refuses to think is not truly free. Herd thinking may soothe us in the moment, but it robs us of the dignity of being ourselves. It exchanges truth for comfort, responsibility for belonging. Here lies another paradox of our age. The fool's voice grows powerful, not merely because he is bold, but because the crowd wants to be deceived. The fool thrives because we invite him to, and so we must ask ourselves, in a world where the herd rewards the loudest, do we have the courage to remain individuals, to resist the soothing call of easy answers, even when it means walking alone?